Hi folks, HR Funk here with my Colt Competition Series 1911 pistol. And the reason I have this pistol with me here today is because recently I received an email from longtime viewer and friend of the channel, Frank Hinkle. And in the email, Frank mentioned that recently he had been talking to a friend of his, and his friend posed a question as to why the 1911 is such an iconic pistol. And Frank went on to say in the email that he thought that maybe that would be a good topic for me to discuss in a video, and I agreed. So earlier today, while I was mulling all this over, I sat down with a blank piece of paper and a pencil, and I started to list all the reasons that I thought the 1911 is an icon in the handgun world. And by the time I got done, I had so much information listed on that piece of paper that I thought if I try to make this into a video, it's going to end up being about 3 hours long, and no one's ever going to want to sit through all of it. So I tried to condense everything down to the top 5 reasons that I think the 1911 is an icon. And in this video, I'm going to go over those top 5 reasons, and I'm hoping that when the video's over, all of you who have watched the video can comment in the comment section and let me know if you have any other reasons you think the 1911 is such an iconic handgun. So with that little bit of an introduction out of the way, let's get on with my top 5 list as to why I think the 1911 is such an iconic pistol. So let's kick things off with reason number 1 as to why the 1911 is such an iconic handgun. And in my mind, that is due to the genius of John Moses Browning. Now, by the time he designed the pistol that became known as the 1911, Browning had already been working on semi-auto handgun designs for several years, and he had come up with some pretty good ones up to that point. But he really outdid himself with the 1911 because with this design, he developed a handgun that first and foremost is very ergonomic. It points well, it feels good in the hand. When you bring it up on target, the sights tend to pretty naturally line up. The controls are very ergonomic. They are easy to reach, easy to operate. It's a simple pistol. It has a phenomenal trigger that allows the shooter to take advantage of the accuracy potential of the handgun. And there is a good bit of accuracy potential in the handgun, even with the GI models. Now, the GI models get criticized quite a bit because the accuracy, depending upon which specific example you are looking at, might not be that great, but the potential is always there. With a good barrel and a good bushing and a good shooter, as I said, the pistol is capable of some very good accuracy. And all of those attributes culminate in a handgun design that is just extremely shootable for a great number of shooters. And when you look at all the various people who are aficionados of the 1911 design, you see all different shapes and sizes, and everyone agrees that the 1911 works very well for them. So again, reason number 1 as to why the 1911 is so iconic is the genius of John Moses Browning. Reason number 2 the 1911 is such an iconic handgun is right here between my thumb and forefinger. What I have here is the .45 ACP cartridge. Now, certainly during the course of the last 11 plus decades, the 1911 has been chambered for other cartridges than the .45 ACP, but the 1911 is indelibly linked to the .45 ACP cartridge. And this cartridge, when we consider it historically, was adopted precisely because handgun cartridges that were used prior to that, especially by the military, were deemed to be ineffective. The .45 ACP was the solution to that problem, and you really don't hear very many people complain about the effectiveness or lack thereof when it comes to the .45 ACP. And with the reliability of the 1911 pistol and the effectiveness of the .45 ACP cartridge, the combination of those two is legendary, to put it mildly, and many people have come to rely on both the handgun and the cartridge for their defensive use. So the second reason the 1911 is such an iconic handgun is the .45 ACP cartridge. Reason number 3 as to why the 1911 is such an iconic handgun is a reason that I don't think can be overstated, and that is its adoption by and 75 plus year history as the official duty sidearm of the United States military. And because of its service And if we go all the way back to the time that it was originally adopted, its performance in the original military trials, it proved itself to be a very, very reliable handgun. And from that point forward, in all the various conflicts, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the various smaller scale conflicts that took place during the course of the, once again, 11 plus decades that this handgun has been in service, it proved itself to be very reliable in some extremely harsh conditions. So our troops became dependent, very much so, on this handgun. And beyond that, the familiarity with literally millions and millions of Americans being trained to use this handgun during their time in the military. If we just look at World War II and the millions of Americans that served during that time who were trained to handle this handgun, and all of the others in the various decades and periods before and after that, there are many, many, many shooters who became intimately familiar with the 1911 handgun as a result of their military service. When those shooters got out of the military and they continued using handguns, because of that level of familiarity, I think a lot of times they just stuck with the handgun that they already knew how to operate, they already felt very comfortable with, and they were very confident in its performance of that being the 1911 handgun. So when we consider all of those, and even some things like the exploits of some famous members of our military, like Alvin York, who was also linked with the 1911 handgun, we see that the 1911 rose to stardom, if you will, as a military sidearm. Now, it has developed beyond there since that time, but that service, as I said at the very beginning of this segment, really can't be overstated, and I think that is a huge reason. It's reason number 3 why the 1911 is such an iconic handgun. Reason number 4 why the 1911 is such an iconic handgun really, I think, is an outgrowth of its service in the U.S. military. And by the way, I should have mentioned in the last segment, I suspect there are still some 1911s out there in service with members of the U.S. military. Even though the handgun has been replaced a couple of times over now, I just got to believe, and there's probably still some jarheads running around with these someplace. Even so, the next reason that I'm going to talk about is the use of the 1911 in competition. And going back to that military service, again, so many people that got used to shooting in military competitions and using the 1911 eventually got out. And we first saw, I think, the use of the 1911 in bullseye style shooting. And again, because of the inherent accuracy potential of this pistol, especially with match grade barrels, match grade bushings, and again, that very fine 1911 trigger, we saw some extreme accuracy potential with the handgun. And then early on, it was adopted by the action shooting crowd. And when we look at Colonel Jeff Cooper, who basically started the IPSC and all of the various action shooting competition that's come about since then, we see the use of the 1911 pistol in the hands of very skilled shooters who are capable of some extreme feats of speed and accuracy with this handgun. And again, all of this just continues to build on the legend of the 1911, and every time it wins another competition, every time we see another video where it's used to perform some amazing feat of shooting, it just goes on and on to establish the 1911 as an icon in the handgun world. So reason number 4 that the 1911 is such an iconic pistol is because of its adoption and performance in shooting competitions. The 5th and final reason that I think the 1911 is such an iconic handgun is difficult to quantify, and it's not really even easy to put into words. But I think what I'll say is the 1911 really is a symbol of the United States of America because of that link to the United States military and so many Americans for so many years who have served while carrying this handgun and who have been trained to use it. Much like the M1 rifle, and I was thinking about that this past Veterans Day, where there was a football game, and before the game started, an honor guard came out onto the field, and the honor guard was not carrying the current M4 carbine, they were not carrying M16s, they were carrying M1 rifles. And again, that's a symbol of the United States. There's something American about wood and steel firearms and a history of service and tradition, and that very much also is embodied by the 1911 pistol. Again, it's very difficult to try to put it into words, and of course it's also probably very dependent upon who you're talking to, whether or not they feel that sense connected with the 1911 pistol. But I think a lot of us do, and I really think that is another reason the 1911 is such an iconic handgun. So there you go, folks. That's my top 5 list as to why I think the 1911 is such an iconic handgun. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 7% off your purchase from Optics Planet. Also, remember the discount code from House of Pain. If you go to House of Pain Armament or House of Pain Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFUNK10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from House of Pain. And don't forget the Target sponsor for the channel. Go to Target's online, check out their inventory, and see if they have anything that's going to meet your Target needs. See you next time, folks. And until then, hopefully with an iconic handgun, good shooting. Bye-bye.